how being bilingual changes people's brain, or what's some of the possibilities?
Well, bilingual, it kind of depends on the extent of the bilingual. One of the things that we see in terms of uh, it's making the distinction between a polyglot and a bilingual. Usually, we in linguistics they reserve the term bilingual for a person who essentially is raised in a context where they use two languages kind of simultaneous or in different social circumstances.
Hmm.
For example, during the period of the Soviet Union, a lot of the local languages which were discouraged by the Soviet government, the people would use at home, but in the public forum and in school and anything like that, they would use Russian.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of these guys were essentially grew up bilingual. Uh, you find the same thing in certain places, like for example in Africa, in Kenya. Uh, in Kenya, you have about two different principal tribal languages,
Mm-hmm.
and most of these most of these people speak Swahili
Mm-hmm.
or Kiswahili, which started out as a pidgin, but became a kind of a very widely used language in the extent that at the present time there's even, there's a literature written in, and it essentially replaced English as the language of Parliament.
Yeah.
And you find these different Swahilis in different countries.
Mm-hmm.
There's a West African version of it, and then there is an East African version of it.
Mm-hmm.
And many kids, I've had a lot of my African students tell me that they learn both their tribal language and Swahili at the same time.
Oh, that's an example of true bilingual. You said that the other type
Yes.
is, and the other type would be, what was that? I forgot the term. So people who,
Polyglot.
yeah, so that's people who grew up with one language and then learned a different language, right?
Exactly. That is right. That's essentially when we go through, and the processes of acquisition are very different. In second language acquisition, we usually see the formation of an interlanguage. We develop this interlanguage to kind of build on and to get closer and closer to the foreign language that we're learning. We may get to the point we can use it fluently, but in some cases, maybe imperfectly.
Uh-huh.
In some cases, people can learn it so, it becomes almost like they've learned it as a child.
Yeah.
And the process the kids go through it is frankly amazing. My son, when we moved to Uruguay,
Mm-hmm.
he picked up Spanish playing with the kids next door in about, I swear to God, in about 3 weeks he was conversing in Spanish.
Wow, that's amazing.
Oh yeah, it did. But it's interesting too that usually when children are learning another language in a social context, they'll go through what's called a silent period.
Which is,
For example, my wife, when she was teaching, she had a boy in her class who was from Saudi Arabia.
mm-hmm.
And she told me one time, she says, I can't get him to talk. He's in his silent period and he's just doesn't seem to come out of it.
Uh-huh.
So I said, well, I'll come in and I'll talk to him and let's see where we can go. And so I came in, I sat down with Aziz and I started speaking to him in Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
And he just stared at me. He would not respond to any of my questions. And at that time, his mother come walking in through the door, And he gets up and he runs over to her and he says, "That guy's speaking to me in Arabic."
In English?
But yeah, no, he told his mother in Arabic. He says,
Okay.
and but the interesting thing was, of course, shortly after that, he began to break through, and by the end of the semester or year, he was rattling off English just like the rest of his classmates.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So in a way, the people who are learn second language acquisition would be harder in a way, right? It would be harder, and the later it is, the harder it is in a way, right? To actually
Well,
acquire the language, so they
yes,
say.
children, of course, are an ideal are ideal candidates. Of course, they because they haven't hardwired their native language so much to the extent that they're going to resist experimenting with producing new sounds that, like, for example, are not in their language. And and older adults, older adults just are so locked into the way, into their speech habits that they can't step out and accommodate the differences. I have had many experiences with that, and it depends.
Yeah.
Some people, pick it up very quickly. Some people do not. It's interesting that English, which is the most widely learned second language in the world, I've heard speakers from all over the place that use, for example, a lot of people who come from India. There is a definite Indian second language, a very different Indian English second language. And you'll hear a lot of speakers use it. They'll speak perfectly comprehensible, grammatically correct English, but they will still reflect a lot of the phonetic and phonemic habits of their native languages.
Yeah, I can say that one thing that I'm also a second language I acquired. I didn't learn it while growing up much, and one of the main problems is translating. So could that be the difference between, because like if I want to say a sentence that I haven't said before, I would need to
Uh-huh.
translate live in a way, but people who don't have their way, they don't need to translate. They just try. And I don't know. Let's say take kids for example. They might be able to speak the language because they heard the same thing. Just copy paste whatever they heard, and they don't try to actually translate anything. But I try to translate a sentence that I have in my native language. Translating it is often hard, and you can't just put different words. Sometimes it's just it
Oh,
takes some time.
absolutely. No, no question. Translation is very challenging. Even, on, like, for example, I read a lot of Japanese poetry, and to try to translate some of that stuff, because Japanese has such a different way of looking at things, different words and different concepts. It can be very challenging. Translation is always a problem.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation always. It's sometimes
Yeah,
even if you have the time to translate a sentence, it might take a while. So doing it live
yeah.
is never doesn't make anything easier. Yeah, it's all right.